We are live. We are not live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me in this. This is the second episode now with my new basement and my fisheye lens. I do need to fix that, but it is what it is for the time being. Tonight is going to be a really fun episode. We have a killer guitarist and just a wonderful person with us. His name is Peter Clemente. He's done all sorts of great stuff, and we'll get to it. Some big notable things, and yeah, thank you for joining me, Pete.
Thanks for having me on your show, Ben.
So, before we get into the nuts and bolts of everything, what I like to ask everybody is, if you weren't in this quarantine pandemic lifestyle, what would you be doing right now?
Good question. Well, I think I would be traveling. I like to travel a little bit in the summers, especially recent years. So I'd probably be looking to take a trip, maybe out to Arizona. That's on my
Mm,
list. Um, Visit some friends. I've got some family out there as well. But I'm here converting my classes to online formats instead.
yeah. And
Um,
so, where are you teaching nowadays? Because I know there was a recent shift in some gigs, but you have multiple places that you're teaching.
Yeah, well, I started off like a lot of guitar players, teaching 1 day a week in a bunch of places, or less, half a day a
Hmm.
week. And over the years, I was fortunate enough to increase my hours in one place, and eventually that led to a full-time position. So right now I'm full-time at Assumption College in Worcester, Mass, which is a small liberal arts college, probably the classic place that's been hit by the changes in higher ed in terms of matriculation and other things, but they're managing to hold on with a lot of changes and updates to try to appeal to students. So anyway, at the moment, I'm full time at Assumption College, and I also adjunct at the Hart School with Chris when there's a need. Right now, there's no need at the moment, but I
Hmm.
enjoy the collaboration tremendously.
And you have a special connection to the University of Hartford.
I do. So, as a high school student, I first found out about that place with going to an Oscar Gillia master class
Mm,
way back between my junior and senior year, and then I decided to apply there. So I went for my undergrad at the Hart School, and then later on in 2008 went back for my DMA as well, in an interest to secure my position at Assumption College, and which it did.
mhm.
So I'm very fortunate in that way. So yeah, I
So,
have a lot of history with that school, and I always will regard it in a very high manner.
absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that I'm excited to get to, because I'd like to start there, and this will sort of uh, color many of the questions that I ask you, is that you and I share a lot of these same I don't know, stomping grounds. Like, there's a lot of things that we have in common, but you got to see them in a completely different state than where they are now, right? So if we talk about the GFA later, um, I know the GFA kind of as it is today, and you have the privilege of knowing what it was like, so many years ago, and the same with the
Right.
Hart School and all that stuff. So let's get into it. You just said that you were a high school student going to see an Oscar Gillia masterclass. So you must have been exposed to the classical guitar for quite some time.
Yeah, I was kind of fortunate. In my case, I grew up in a musical family. My dad was a professional jazz guitarist, and he owned a little teaching studio in the Worcester area.
Hmm.
So he gave me some lessons when I was a kid. He didn't really play classical guitar, but when I was about 12 or 13, I kind of heard some great John Williams recordings, and at that
Yeah.
point, there really was no YouTube or anything to inspire people like there is now. But I heard these fantastic recordings, got myself a classical teacher, and really from about that point on. So I've been playing about 3 years before I applied to Hart as an undergrad,
Oh,
which
wow.
at that time was kind of most of my colleagues at that time, or my friends rather, that I was going to school with, hadn't been playing classical that long anyway. They might have
Yeah.
been playing rock even longer, but not classical. So it was a little unusual the way I got kind of onto it a little younger.
Do you remember what really attracted you to that style of guitar? Because I would say the majority of the conversations I have with people start off as like, yeah, I played electric guitar, I played, pop songs, and then I was sort of, forced into classical guitar at school, and then I fell in love with it. But you're saying you grew up with sort of this presence of jazz, but then something hooked you into classical guitar. Do you remember what that feeling was, or that idea?
Yeah, I just could not get over the sound of the instrument in terms of its tone color being so beautiful, but also the idea that you could create all these voices
Mm,
simultaneously. My dad was an unusual player. He was a jazz player for the most part, but he had a streak in him which was kind of common for that generation. The older, he would be like an older school jazz player
sure.
by today's standards,
Hmm.
where he played a lot of semi-classical music, plectrum style. So I got to hear beautiful classical melodies played by him in his own arrangements. But
Sure.
I kind of it became like a little bit of a transit, kind of a middle ground. So I got kind of aware of the music through him, but also through my mom, who was an amateur opera singer.
Mm,
So I kind of had a lot of influence in that way. But in terms of the guitar goes, I just loved the full bouquet of sound that you could produce without that was not available to pick style players.
sure.
And I found the pick style thing kind of limiting. My father kind of developed the art of the solo plectrum guitar quite exquisitely, actually.
Mm,
Kind of in the mode of, I would say, the closest thing I could think of would be like a Joe Pass, for example.
sure. Sure.
And even Joe Pass would do a lot of hybrid, walking bass lines and kind of pluck the strings in his own kind of way. My dad never even did that, but he did develop a very elegant way of playing solo guitar, which I really enjoyed as well. So I guess I got onto solo guitar from my dad, but kind of wanted to expand it by way of what the classical players were doing at that time.
Sure. That's so cool. It took me a very long time. It took me halfway through my undergrad degree to really appreciate, what the classical guitar could do in terms of color and sound. Because for
Yeah,
me, I had played rock guitar so long, and I knew that the electric guitar couldn't do dynamics the way that uh, the the classical guitar could do. But I didn't appreciate really, I mean, we talk about changing like the angle of your nail and getting a
right.
different color. Like that was like, it both sounded like a plucked string to me. It didn't really make a difference what color it was for a very long time, and then it took me a while to develop that. So you studied for a while, you applied to the Hart School, and can I ask you what year that was that you
So
did
I,
that?
I entered the Hart School in the fall of 1977,
Okay,
and I
awesome.
graduated in '81. So the department at that point, at a point in history, was really viewed quite prominently in the guitar world. In fact, it was kind of a unique place. I remember applying to a number of other schools as a senior in high school, Juilliard, Boston University, and those schools, as great as they are now, had no guitar programs at that time.
Wow.
So,
It's what
Hart School and New England Conservatory were the only two that had programs at that time. And I would, I got to really make a connection with Dick that I could not make it at NEC. I did apply, think about applying to NEC, but it seemed like the program was more developed and organized at that time at Hart. So that's why I ended up sticking with that.
what do you think? I mean, we saw um like one of Segovia's missions was to really I think of this aspect of Segovia very similar to like Giuliani. Giuliani wanted to legitimize, is that a word? Legitimize
Yeah.
the guitar, right? He was like, we're done playing songs, we're done strumming, we're going to show you how great this thing can be and how serious we can be. And Segovia, I think, did a lot of that too, right? By saying we're going to bring this to the universities. But that it didn't really happen in America until I'm totally shooting in the dark here. The middle of the 1900s. Is that
Yeah,
does that
I
sound
think
correct to you?
that's pretty accurate.
So the
Yeah,
East Coast, there was the University of Hartford, right? That was a big hub.
correct.
Would you say, and this is my own speculation, that was mostly because Richard Provost and Oscar Giglia knew that Oscar didn't come back till later, but they knew that style of guitar so well because they learned it from such a great pedagogue.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And also, I think, with Dick, I think he had a great vision for what a guitarist would need, and he was able to put that into a program. I think that was it was kind of he was traveling some he was blazing some trails at that time.
Sure.
I can remember there were a few other programs going on, in the country, and Elliot Fisk was at Yale at that time. And I can also recall Claire Callahan was at the University of Cincinnati at that
Mm-hmm.
time, and Jim Smith was out in Arizona. But it didn't seem like there were as many programs as there are now.
Sure. Yeah, oh, there's programs everywhere, right? It's
Yeah,
exploding. What what was that experience like to be a part of? What were the players like? What were your fellow students like?
yeah, we had a really strong class. All the classes around. I mean, some of the graduating seniors I can recall. Um, Very strong players, even in the classes before me. But in my class, I was really proud to be a fellow classmate of Dave Cullen, who was
Hmm.
a very prominent player now in the Philadelphia area, Reading, PA area. He does studio work. He's won some Grammys in the New Age category for solo guitar. He's done some stuff with Boys to Men and
Hmm.
crossover. He was
Yeah,
always a fabulous,
they live down there.
fabulous electric guitarist.
Yeah.
Another classmate of mine was Alan Goldspiel, who
Hmm.
also went back to Hart for a doctorate years later, and he's now a dean at a school down in the South. And I'm going to blank on the name of
Yeah.
the college, but he stayed in higher ed and still performs. So anyway, a lot of the other some of the other classmates of mine, they've gone into other fields, but they still play.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so I just felt really proud to be a part of that
Of
class.
course.
We
Of
had a
course.
really great, and it was nice because, as great as the courses were, and all the courses that are in the program now, currently, lute
Hmm.
tab and guitar lit and all that. I'd say half the education was getting to know what your classmates were playing and talking to them in the halls, out by the stairs, by the practice rooms, and listening to them play through, the first few phrases of the Grand Overture that you weren't working on yet,
Right.
that you would be, you would then ask your teacher for later. So that was a big part of the education because you can't learn all the repertoire yourself. So you kind of learn
Yeah.
it through
Absolutely.
everyone else. You kind of learn it. It's kind of a nice thing, as opposed to being the only guitar major in a smaller school. One or two majors. That's great, but you don't get that sort of fringe benefit of that community.
I was just talking with someone the interview before you, and he was talking about a school that he had went to for his master's, and he said it was the opposite of that. The studio was very difficult to. I mean, it was great education, but the studio was very competitive, and there wasn't a lot of camaraderie like there is at the University of Hartford.
Right.
And so he was saying how that really was something that he missed from his undergrad experience, and then from his artist diploma that came after.
Yeah, it really is important. Sometimes you look at the teacher and the program, and you kind of put that up at the top, but that other part it actually is really important. I think.
So this is a difficult question, but I'm curious to see what your answer is. After, um, I mean, because you and I know the sort of like the Richard Provost and Chris Ladd and like the Hart School of today,
Right.
but you knew Dick back then. What was like the core or a couple core principles that you learned in your undergrad that you would say? I mean, obviously your undergrad is like mind blowing and opens up a whole new new set of doors and this and that, but could you like describe like what the philosophy was, what you really said, oh, this is something I really took away from my undergrad?
Okay, well, that's a really good question. So, to answer that, the one teacher I had before that was a very inspired musician in that with a capital M, but not necessarily a guitarist. So, I mean, he was actually a wonderful guitarist, but I don't think he ever thought about a way to teach a student how to work and how to move their fingers efficiently. I was kind of lucky that I kind of had a little bit of intuitive um, way about both of those things, not really realizing it at the time. But the biggest thing I got when I began my undergrad studying with Dick is to learn how to work, how to break down problems in a logical way. And he really took most of that whole first year to reorganize my technique. And I had started off with some uh, weird habits because of that other teacher didn't really. He kind of let me kind of just try whatever I could, and I kind of hit some walls, you know. And I
Yeah.
took most of that first year to really reorganize my technique and sound. I had a significant right hand position change at that time, so that would be the biggest
Sure.
takeaway I got. And of course, being exposed to all the literature over those 4 years was tremendous. I hadn't gotten through that much repertoire in that bit of time when I was in high school. I mean, I played source studies and a few things,
Yeah.
but yeah. So
Yeah.
learning how to work, how to break down problems, how to analyze, and I always was impressed with how he always knew what the latest thing happening was. He always could give you um, a reference to something that was current, going on, seemed to be cutting edge about everything at that time with regard to pedagogy. And
Sure. Sure.
I really benefited from that, I think.
So you graduate in 1981.
Right.
5 years later, something really great happens, which is that you win the third year of the GFA.
Um, I think it was the second year. I think Mary Ackerman won in 1985, I
So
believe.
hold on, I'm looking right now. No, it's the fourth
Was it?
because it's my first one was Michael Chapdelaine,
Oh, okay.
and
I
then
wasn't really aware. I think Mary
Adam
Ackerman
Holtzman.
won the year before I did.
Yeah, and then there was no
Yeah.
winner in '84. But uh, between the time that, what were you doing right after your undergraduate
Yeah, so
degree?
what I did is I moved back to Worcester from
Hmm.
Connecticut, and I did what seemed the logical thing was to start a teaching practice in my dad's studio, as I noted earlier. We didn't have anybody really teaching classical guitar there at that time, so I kind of was able to draw students, and of course, as you know, at that level, you're teaching not just classical guitar, you got some folk guitar students, and you got a mixed bag. But over the next bunch of years, I was able to kind of filter it out. So I had a pretty good classical schedule, at one point. So anyway, um, I had met David Leisner,
Hmm.
and he had heard me play. I don't remember exactly where, but he called me up in 1983 and said, "I think I could. Would you like it if? Would you like to go to New England Conservatory for a master's to study with me, and I'll try to get you some financial aid to do that."
Hmm. Hmm.
So I had seen him play at a big GFA festival around that same time, and like I say, we made you know a little bit of contact, and so I thought that would be really good because to be honest, I wasn't sure the next thing to do.
Right.
I
Right.
wasn't sure if I wanted to go for a master's, and I was playing a lot of gigs at that time, and I was playing a fair amount of concerts. But I thought, well, this seems to be the where most people continue, and I can continue to develop and make some forays into the Boston scene. That was another thing. So I did that, and David had me enter a number of competitions in those 2 years. And David was a very persuasive, very powerful teacher.
Yeah.
He kind of reminded me a bit of my first teacher, being so musically uh, um,
Holistic.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. In
Yeah.
some ways, we never really talked about technique at all. And I should also tell you that when I studied with David, it was during his hand injury period.
Okay. Okay.
So he wasn't, he didn't, I don't know if he played one note in the 2 years that I
Wow.
studied with him.
Sure.
He had just gotten the injury, and he would fly in from New York to Boston each week. And it was just a music coaching, basically. And,
What
um, and
what
and
was
he
like
didn't
the
really change anything about my technique. He didn't see
right, right.
um, anything. And anyway, so he encouraged me. He was very persuasive and encouraging with competitions. And so I entered the Puerto Rico competition in 1985, and I won a second prize down there. Alfredo Sanchez, a fantastic Mexican player, won the first prize that
Oh,
year.
okay.
Um, and so then in '86, he said you should try for the GFA, and so I learned the material and was able to get to the finals. I remember Bill Cannengeiser being one of the judges in the finals that year,
Hmm.
and it was kind of surreal. I didn't expect to get to the finals, but I was really, I think at that point in time, I was probably uh, at the high point in terms of where I was developing technically and musically,
Right.
and those things got together.
Yeah.
I was doing just enough teaching so it didn't really interfere with it, and I had everything kind of going along in my life at the time that was also in accord with it. So everything seemed to be
Sure.
lining up.
Sure.
Later on, it doesn't always seem to do that. You get periods where you get
Sure.
conflict. But anyway, that was a really great honor. I did that year. They were offering a cash prize plus
Hmm.
a concert tour of California and Texas and Arizona, which I did the following year. I played at the next year's GFA festival in Tempe, Arizona, I recall, and it was really a great experience. I got a review in Soundboard at that time. And then I did one other competition with David. I did the Toronto competition in '87,
Mm.
which
Okay.
actually I had graduated by then, but I did it anyway. It was kind of a, and I got to be a semifinalist, but that's as far as I got.
Yeah. When do you remember what you played for the GFA? Do you remember what the set piece was?
Yeah,
And
it was Alexander Tonsman's Variations on a Theme by Scriabin.
oh, okay. Yeah.
It's this kind of dark, you know, evocative piece in the key of B minor. It's
Yeah.
beautiful,
Yeah.
and I've never really played it. There was also a piece by Casanova Tedesco required called "Oranges in Bloom."
Oh, okay.
It was a
Cool.
reflective kind of piece. It sounded like kind of film music. It had a light sound. That
That's
was
awesome.
another one. Yeah.
What was the climate like at a place like the GFA? I mean, I haven't been. I've seen. I was planning to go this year, but that didn't happen. And I've heard stories and I've seen videos of like the stuff that's happening now. Not just the players, but this is one of the many competitions for guitar now, and one of the big places where classical guitarists can get together and and socialize. And what was it like in the 80s?
I have to say, I found the fellow competitors very supportive. There was never any animosity. People were interested to what you were doing.
Hmm.
It was friendly and healthy competition. I think at its best. I thought at that time.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get any negativity. Obviously, it's a real scary thing to do, and you kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
put a little bubble around yourself, so to speak. You kind of insulate your focus just on the music and what you're trying to do. But
Yeah.
yeah, I found a really positive experience. Although the whole idea of a competition is sort of unnatural, right? You can't quantify musical
Right.
expression, so
Exactly. Yeah.
there's something
Yeah.
inherently, kind of unnatural about it. But on the
Sure.
other hand, it's what helps people along, and it does make you. I think one of the things I learned about it. Um, I also was in the Segovia competition too, which I'll tell you about in a second. But the thing about it is it's really a win-win situation because it inspires you to be your best. Whether you win or not doesn't really matter. You know, that
Right,
kind of
right.
the result of it is outside of your control. But the preparation and the listening to yourself every day, recording yourself, that whole process that goes with it is really great. And when you're not in a competition, I don't know. I don't think a lot of people quite operate that way.
Sure.
Um,
I
you
was
know,
talking with guitarist Tariq Harb. I don't know if you're familiar with
yeah,
him. And he was talking about his experience studying with Jeffrey McFadden, who said, go compete not to win, but to learn and to be
exactly.
operating at your best. Um, so you were saying that you also did the Segovia
Yeah,
competition.
in 1984, Segovia, who at that point was, I
He
don't know,
died. He died in '87, right?
yeah, it's about 3 years before he died. New York University held a scholarship, um, started a scholarship, sorry, no, I'm sorry, a fellowship in
Mm-hmm.
his name called the Segovia Fellowship. And it was to be a yearly renewable uh, program that would focus on continuing Segovia's work.
Sure.
And they would give it to a guitarist every year. So 1984 was the first year they did it. I'm not aware that they continued it after, or I didn't really follow it. But anyway, I applied for it and I made the first round, which was an audio tape at that point. Then I went there for the second round to New York University. Made it to, I got all the way to the finals. And the finals were judged by Segovia,
Oh, yeah.
Elliot
Nope.
Fisk, and Alicia De La Rocha, the pianist.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
That was a pretty intimidating,
That's a rough panel. I wouldn't want to see
rough,
them
rough.
in
Yeah,
my jury.
right. And so anyway, I played in the final round of that, and I did not win. I was one of three,
Mm-hmm.
and a guy named David Burgess from Washington State
Okay. I
ended
don't know
up
that
winning,
name.
and he moved to New York. And I'm not sure. I think he made a recording with part of the money.
Sure. Sure.
I believe I kept in touch with him for a little while, but that was a great experience as well. I got to shake Segovia's hand, and I'll never
Wow.
forget what that felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he kind of he said he encouraged me to try again the following year
Yeah.
when I that briefly, and then I got a beautiful note from Elliot
Okay.
after that, who also encouraged me to keep going, and I still to this day have that postcard Elliot sent me
That's awesome. That's
after
so cool.
So yeah, so it was a good experience.
He seems like a really fun guy. It's my one of my hopes to get him on the show someday.
Yeah, yeah, and we have a nice connection now. I had
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
I was able to get him to come to Assumption 2 years ago to play a solo concert,
Oh, cool. Very
and
cool.
so that
Yeah.
was it was amazing.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I do some when they have their festival up in Boston. I
Mm-hmm.
usually get together with those guys and him. So
Sure.
it
Sure.
kind of started a bit of a connection.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
really nice.
You kind of have to, right? I mean, you're talking about a very, I mean, it's a niche market, but it's also, it's a brotherhood, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because there's, look, what we do is very narrow, but it goes very long, right? Like there's a lot of different places you can be within the scope of a classical guitar performer,
Yep.
and especially the geography of all of this. It's not like we're across Europe from each other. I mean, you're talking
Right.
about two schools in Massachusetts. You're talking about a school in Hartford, Connecticut. So all along the East Coast, it feels like there's a lot of good connections.
Oh
So
yeah.
what was that GFA tour like? Because you said you went all across California and down to New Mexico.
Yeah, I think they expanded it over the, subsequent years because I
Mm-hmm.
recall I was teaching at some other colleges adjunct in those years after
Mm-hmm.
that. I can recall getting formal notices to try to, host the current GFA winner. I don't recall any of that quite so. It wasn't
Right.
quite so developed when I did it, but I played at a number of colleges in Southern California, in the in the Los Angeles area,
Sure.
San Diego area, and then I played in a couple of concerts in Texas, where I was hosted by Charles Postlethwaite, who recently passed away, I believe, in the last couple of years.
Hmm.
He was very famous for developing the five finger thing.
Oh, okay. Yep. Yep.
He published a couple of books, kind of basically revisiting that whole Brazilian school of playing with all five fingers.
Sure. Sure.
Um, anyway, so I would say it was probably about maybe 7 or 8 concerts total.
Hmm.
It wasn't like 3 months worth of, it
Sure.
was more
Yeah.
like a couple of weeks. And I
Yeah.
played a couple in Northern California too, in the Carmel area. And they were mostly at small community colleges, and I was stunned at the time of how many guitarists there were and how big these guitar programs were in the West
Mm.
in community colleges. I can recall Fred Benedetti, who was a teacher at a community college in San Diego, and he had
Hmm.
something like 22 guitar majors in a community
Wow.
college at that time. Of course,
Yeah.
this was in the late 80s, but still,
Sure.
I couldn't think of anything comparable to that out here. You know,
No, even now, I know that Tunxus Community College in Farmington, Connecticut, has a music program. I think
right?
you can get, and Manchester does too. But I don't know. Can you actually graduate with an associate's in music, or is it just like a liberal arts extension? Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. I'm not aware of any place around here where you can
yeah.
study music that seriously in a 2-year associate's program.
Do
I,
you have any idea why you think the West Coast was so ahead, um, with classical guitar?
I would be guessing if I tried to say it, but I'm
Yeah.
wondering if it's all the, at that point the Romeros were really, you know, high level profile performers, all
Sure.
as they still are, but
Sure.
at that point, Pepe Romero was and Angel were touring regularly
Right.
all over the place. I don't know if it's the closeness to Mexico and that maybe the culture is a little different, maybe a little more receptive to
Sure.
classical guitar versus rock guitar. I don't really know
Yeah. Yeah.
the answer to that question, but I was struck by the difference. Yeah.
So after that, I mean, it sounds like you went into these competitions sort of like, yeah, we'll see what happens. And then it
Yeah,
sounds like you had some good luck, and then you just got, I don't know if it was like an addictive thing, or you just realized that it was so helpful for you to, as a player and as a musician. But it sounds like you got a lot of education, um, through yourself through those competitions. After
absolutely. Yeah.
after after like the mid 80s, where did your career go from there? How did performance and teaching and practice, how did that
Yeah.
all sort of
So
work for you?
those competitions helped to build connections, and also, I grew as a musician and as a guitarist doing those things, and I started getting a number of adjunct teaching positions all through New England. I was in
Hmm.
Boston at the Longy School, which is where Chris is now.
Hmm.
I was at Tufts University for 10 years. So I kind of found that, and at that point in time, I don't think there were a terrible amount of classical guitarists in the area to take these positions. I think it was a little easier to get them. Those
Yeah.
kind of adjunct jobs where you go in 1 day a week, 2 days a week. And so I was driving everywhere. But as you have already discovered, once you have children, driving everywhere is not always possible.
Yeah.
And I was staying home a lot with my kids when they were small. And I had to make this big decision whether I would continue my work in Boston teaching. I was at BU, that was another place.
Sure.
I had all these, and the contacts were great, but I realized that I had to make a decision, stay home with the kids some days. My wife at the time was working, and she didn't have a lot of control over the hours
Hmm.
that she had to work. So, to make a long story short, I decided to keep all my teaching out in Worcester. So
Hmm.
that's why I focused on a couple of colleges out here, Clark University and Assumption.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, that was a tough decision because I lost the concept of serious students in majors, and those schools had offered more of
Right.
the intangibles. The students that you would see there would be a little different, and I
Right. I'm
missed
sure.
that. And
Yeah.
also the faculty, the connection to some of these really wonderful players out there
Yeah.
that you could. Yeah, I collaborated with on a number of chamber music things. I missed all that, and so anyway, make long story short, I felt I really didn't have a choice. It was kind of
Yeah.
these are the things you do. So anyway, but I made the best out of the Worcester teaching, and was kind of surprised to see that at Assumption, which was probably the least likely of all the schools that I was involved with, started giving me more and more things to do.
Yeah.
And I went from a adjunct position to a half-time position. And I think yeah, I was at halftime for quite a while. And then finally, some people retired, a couple of colleagues retired, and I got the opportunity to step up to full time. And I was just lucky in that way.
Sure. Sure.
So there really was no position there when I started. I kind of created it, and the studies that I took, like at art school with
Hmm.
world music, helped to develop that program because I implemented some courses.
Yeah.
So it all kind of worked out. I missed the serious students like you would find at the Hart School or any other place, a conservatory. But on the other hand, I'm fortunate that I do love the teaching, and I feel very fortunate that I can do this. So
There's always been a connection, I think, and I would imagine you agree too. There's such a huge connection between some of the best teachers and the best players. Let me rephrase that. You cannot teach something so well if you can't do it. And or maybe that was the chicken before the egg. I don't know which one comes first. If I've had some really great master classes with people that can teach and know what they're doing, and I've had some master classes with some people. I've told the story once on the podcast already. I'll tell you again. There was a GFA winner. I won't say who. This was several years ago. I played him the prelude to the PFA, and he said, "Well, let's just put ornaments everywhere." And I said, well, okay, so, and this guy won the GFA, and this is part of the master class, right? And I was like, okay, so where do we put ornaments? Oh, just wherever you want them is kind of how the master class went, right? And he was a lovely person, but it was a terrible class. So it seems like there's a connection between like the really brilliant musicians and also understanding physically how to do it, right? And so you got that education. Well, it sounds like it started with Richard Provost, but can you talk a little bit about your love for teaching, because you've been doing it for a long time, and if you really didn't have that understanding of how to do it on the guitar, how to turn it into music, and how to also work with people, right? So I
right.
don't know, I didn't really ask a specific question, but what is it? I don't know if maybe you could talk about what that means to you.
Well, I think what you say is really really true. I recall those teaching principles classes at the Hart School that I didn't know how to teach. I really never thought about teaching before you start teaching. But those classes offered a kind of beginning of the process of what your teaching principles are. And I found that there there's a certain kind of way you teach where you lay out something logically for a student, and that challenge is the same whether they're playing the prelude to the fourth lute suite or they're playing some simple exercise in a in a book. You know, the concept, because that exercise in that book is just as hard for that student as it is for someone like yourself or a conservatory student to play a piece of Bach. So
Right.
it's the same relationship, even though. So I the way I learned to work through my training with Dick directly had a correlation to when I started teaching myself, because I kind of feel as though that's the biggest thing you can give someone is teaching them how to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather, because the musicianship and musicality, that's up here, and that's going to kind of manifest differently in everybody, and I don't think you really want to control that part, but you
Right.
could teach them how to gain a voice, how to work, and how to save time. Ed Flower, I took some lessons from him as well years ago. One of the things he said to me, I always liked, he said, one of the best things a teacher can do is save you time.
Yeah,
Having,
absolutely.
showing you this isn't going to work. You're better off putting the right hand fingerings in,
Yeah.
even though you think you don't need to,
Yep. Right
because
on.
this is what's going to happen if you don't, and
Yeah.
kind of, saving the student time like that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the way I approached lessons, and also the concept of supervised practice. I look at the lesson as kind of a model of what they're going to go home and do,
Sure.
supposedly.
Sure.
And so to try to create as many accurate repetitions of whatever they're doing in the lesson so they can go home and recreate that.
Right. Right.
So yeah, at sometimes I wish the level were higher where I am to teach because I get inspired with music, but I also enjoy seeing a student grow no matter what they're doing.
Sure.
And a lot of those students go on and become, folk guitar players and rock guitar players and other things like that. And I consider that to be okay.
Hmm.
I also had another unusual situation when I was teaching privately in the 80s. When I was in grad school at NEC, I had a little job in a community music school, and in the just north of Worcester. And for a student, I got this 16-year-old kid sign up for lessons,
Hmm.
really long hair. His name was Nuno Betancourt.
Oh boy, we know that
Okay.
name.
Yeah. Now, so at that point was just a high school student. Came to me
Sure.
and said, "I want to learn some classical. But I also want to learn how to play mode. I want to learn the modes, and I want to play some rock too." And so,
Yeah.
I never became a rock player of any note at all. So
Right. Right.
I said, well, you know what? I can teach you how to work. I'll teach you some classical, and I'll teach you whatever little bit of improv I can. I learned some things from my dad about chord
Yeah.
scale relationships and
Right.
so
Right. Right.
but anyway, he took lessons from me for like a year and then quit. And the next
Yeah.
thing I know, 2 years later, I'm seeing his face on Rolling Stone magazine.
Sure. Sure. Wow. That's pretty.
And
That's wild.
yeah, so that I guess what I'm saying is I enjoy kind of letting each person find their own way,
Sure.
whether
Sure.
that way has anything to do with what I'm doing or not is irrelevant.
And that's really, for you and I, that's really reminiscent of, I mean, like you're preaching to the choir when you say saving time and how to work. That's the first person I think of is Chris Ladd, but really that comes from Dick Provost, which probably comes from all of his education as well. Um, that's really cool. So you go from, well, I have a whole bunch of questions, but I guess the 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 next logical thing would be, how did performance impact, or how did performance sort of play into your career? We have these competitions where you're learning not just how to work, but how to play efficiently and save energy and save time, right?
Right.
And then you're teaching, you're building up all these relationships. You're it sounds like sort of between the mid 80s and the 90s exploding with these different opportunities, right, to go teach here and teach here. You make some decisions based on your family at home. How did performance play into all of that?
Well, as the 90s kind of went through, I did a lot of playing in Boston. I really, those faculty positions that I had out there really got me connected with some of the best musicians, flute players, violinists,
Hmm.
poets. I did a lot of stuff at WGBH radio.
Okay.
And anyway, I did a lot of New England performing at that time, and I made a couple of CDs.
Yeah.
And also guest played as a guest on a lot of other people's CDs.
Hmm.
And so I enjoyed all that, but I saw as my teaching got more established at Assumption, I kind of began to see guitar as sort of a partner, a way to kind of develop my teaching career rather than a playing career.
Sure.
I saw that kind of separate.
Yeah.
When I was studying with David and doing the competitions, I was still kind of under the concept that, well, maybe I'll be a performer only,
Right.
you know, and I'll just teach, a little bit here and there. I was really trying to build my performing career. I was trying to get as many concerts every year as I could. And gradually I lost interest in that because I really enjoyed the challenge of classroom course teaching.
Sure.
it forced me to reach into a lot of the training that I got when I was, an undergrad at the Hart School, in theory courses and other things. I remember dragging out my old music history books, and I
Hmm.
was teaching a Western survey class. And so I kind of enjoyed that. And I wanted to use the guitar to build that rather than just the guitar alone. So
Got one of
my
those right
interest
here.
in going
You
back
ready
for
for
the,
this? Right. Never,
all right,
never keep it too far away. I got a whole bunch of them right
exactly,
here.
right. And I was so glad that when I was a student there, I used to really try to be a sponge to all those courses. I
Hmm.
really tried to get as much out of as I could out of them. And I did the same thing when I was in NEC, and I'm kind of glad I did because it made teaching easier. I can recall a lot of a number of my fellow students who really looked at music school as um, uh, they just wanted to use it as guitar lessons.
Right.
Okay. And I remember one of my theory teachers, I think it was James Sellers, who passed away. But one of the things he said to us as freshmen, I remember, is he said, if all you want to do is practice, you should just go take lessons somewhere. You shouldn't be here
Right.
because this is going to challenge you in other ways. And there are going to be times when you can't practice because you'll be
Right.
too busy taking tests and other things. So you have to accept that you're getting something in return that's different and expect the guitar to take a back seat to that, you know, at times. And
Sure.
as you know, and everybody knows that's what happens. So I kind of always remembered that. And so when I went to teach, it was kind of fun to pull out, some of these old anthologies of music
Hmm.
that I had in my
Hmm.
music history class and
Sure. Sure.
theory books that I used. And I saw the guitar as being something that gave me a presence on campus, and I kept bringing attention to the campus by doing concerts.
Yeah.
But I kind of stopped the concept of that I was going to be a solo performer
Right.
all the time.
Right.
I still do solo things, but
Right.
I look at it in relation to what it can do for my teaching career.
Sure.
You know,
And that's, that's sort of, I mean, again, it shows that a whole lot about this instrument, and you're quite, a technician if you can sustain a teaching career for that long. I think what is the thing that people say, if you people who can't teach, it's the opposite for guitar. Like, you cannot teach if you don't know how to play the guitar, the classical guitar. So I think that's absolutely wonderful. So I'd love to just talk about a little bit about sort of like the current, or just like your musical taste, because I've only seen you perform a handful of times, but they've been really eclectic. And I'm sure at the point in your career, you can kind of pick and choose, and you've probably been exposed to and played so much music that you can decide what it is that you want to gravitate toward. But I've seen you do some really cool jazz arrangements. I know that you taught a class at Guitar Day at UHeart on jazz improvisation, or just improvisation maybe. And then I've also seen you play some Koshkin. That's really cool. Can you just talk about like where your tastes lie? Maybe just today,
sure.
like what do you when you pick up the guitar, what are you thinking of playing? What are you thinking of
Yeah.
studying?
Well, I think the interest in improvisation. I used to see my dad do these beautiful improvs on the guitar, so I always kind of was taken by that. And one of the themes that you encounter, I had a minor area of emphasis in grad school, both at the conservatory and when I was working on my doctorate at the Hart School, was in world music. And I had a wonderful course at the conservatory. I took a couple of semesters of Indian music, and the teacher, a flutist actually, her name was Abby Rabinovitz. She was a world music person in the Boston area at the time, and we ended up forming a duo that featured a lot of improvisation after I got out of the school. And we used to call ourselves Players Two. And we used to do
Oh,
concerts, we used to play gigs, and I used to love the way she improvised with this sort of jazz slash Indian style of improvising. She had this way of
hmm.
developing. Her sound was not a typical jazz sound on a flute,
Sure.
but it wasn't a classical sound either. It was in
Right.
between. It was really great. So I guess what I would say is, I met a lot of musicians. I did a lot of stuff with the Klezmer Conservatory Band over the years, subbing for them, spin-off gigs. So I kind of always enjoyed that. So in my own playing, I always like music that's inspired by that. That's why I like, playing things like, Rodrigo
Sure.
and music that's inspired by the improvisational concept. Brower, aleatoric music that features that's not the same all the time.
Sure. Sure. I'm actually looking up your album right now because I know. See, here's me trying to be slick and then just telling you. Now, is this the okay? I'm looking at your album with
Jill Drieben.
Jill
Yeah.
Drieben.
So yeah, that was one where we did some Piazzolla,
Hmm.
and we did the Monhegan Suite on that.
Right.
So yeah, she was another one of those Boston musicians that I met during that period with the when I was in grad school out there.
Now,
But
the reason that I bring that up is because I'm looking at this, and I think I knew this somewhere. You on this is Canyon Echoes, the Monhegan Suite, and the history of the tango. Definitely the history of the tango and Canyon Echoes have a very. I mean, it sounds like that's being improvised, right?
right,
I mean,
exactly,
two
exactly.
completely different styles. The Monhegan Suite is. I mean, I don't know. This must be a connection somewhere. You were talking about one of the GFA pieces, the Castle Nuovo Tedesco, having this like film score, this film
Right.
music quality, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Monhegan Suite, which was John Kusiak, not the
Kusiak,
actor,
correct.
not the actor. He did a whole bunch of music for HBO films, if I'm
Yeah,
not
he's
mistaken.
really he's kind of an unusual story. He started off as a blues guitar player back in
Right.
the day, and he played with actually a band called the Poussart Dart Band,
Ooh,
and
that
they were
sounds
a
dirty.
yeah, yeah. And he was their guitarist for a long time. Anyway, he got into this film score writing kind of on his own, and he has this phenomenal studio in the basement of his house. And to be honest, I don't know how he made those connections because Anyway, but he writes
Yeah.
kind of in that very very accessible style.
See, I'm looking at his website right now, and I'm seeing Netflix, Team Foxcatcher, Tabloid. That was a good movie. That's a crazy
Right.
that movie, Tabloid.
Yeah.
That's a
Right.
crazy movie. The
Yeah.
Jinx, Robert Durst, and then here's this guy who probably makes most of his composer money on these big not Hollywood productions, but these television and film things, and then the Monhegan Suite is like the total opposite. This like
Yeah.
awesome piece for classical guitar that you would think was written by a composer that only composes, sort of like contemporary classical music.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. He really switched gears on that. It was kind of an interesting connection. My friend Jill, who I've had a duo with for years, flute and
Hmm.
guitar, her family and his family, they live like around the block from one another
Oh,
in
okay.
Arlington, Mass. So she kind of grew up. His kids grew up with her kids, and so they vacation on Monhegan Island every year together, and that's
Mm.
what prompted that theme. So
Have you?
she got some startup money on a Facebook GoFundMe thing
Yeah.
and said, can you write a piece for guitar and flute? And so he came up with that.
Oh, so
So
she commissioned it.
she commissioned it. Correct.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
you ever have you ever been to that island?
I have. We went up there to perform it. We premiered it up there a few
Wow.
years back. That was really fun. On a whole island with
Yeah.
no electricity, basically. Everything gets dark and people read books until they can't read books anymore, and then they go to sleep.
One of the I'm sure this is just a universal classical guitarist thing or musician thing or artist thing. Hopefully it's not just me, but you have an experience, you think you know what it meant, and then an experience 5 years later to sort of teach you something that you didn't get. When I was studying that piece, I mean, it's a fairly easy piece to play technically.
Right.
And it's, you know, it's a lot of fun, and I feel like it's one of those pieces that's high reward and not a lot of risk.
Right.
Whereas something like, for me, the Grand Overture would be on the other side of that,
Yeah.
that chart. But when I was studying that piece, my flute player and I were just looking at pictures of it online. We didn't get a chance to go up there. That was not really in the question, with schedule, and we were in grad school. But we performed the piece. It was successful, this and that, right? But I think this was last summer. The New Britain Museum of American Art in Connecticut had an exhibit. I just had no idea. Just walking there, and I just see like the Monhegan Islands, right, or whatever it is, like Monhegan Island, on this giant poster exhibit in this room. And I go in, and I'm seeing all of these beautiful paintings, and it's like, oh, okay, this is what. And one of them said Lobster Cove, which is the name of one of the movements,
Right.
and this and
Right.
that. And
Yeah.
so it's like looking at the pictures on Google was whatever, but really seeing other art forms, and to know that location is so special that it inspired a piece of music, plenty of artists, rendering, in different styles. So that was a
Right.
really transformative experience.
Wow. When was that? Was that recently?
You know,
You,
I just said it was last summer, but I remember my son being on the carrier. So so it probably was over the winter.
hmm.
Because it was
I'd
before
love
the
to see
shutdown.
that.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
before the shutdown. And there's some really cool pictures that really, I thought, oh man, I wish I was thinking about this while playing that movement. There's one at
Yeah.
the library too, which is one of the movements.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
It's a really interesting island. It's one of these places that people go who want to completely unplug from the world.
right.
There are no cars allowed. You can't. There's not a vehicle on the island. When you go, it's all walking.
Wow.
So I had a heavy duffel bag, and I had a heavy guitar case at the time, and I got off the boat, and I was expecting to be picked up by somebody, and I had to walk a mile to get to
Yeah.
this cabin I was staying in. So it's really, but the trails are exquisite. I was only there a few days. We did that concert to premiere it.
Hmm.
But it was still a great thing. But it draws all these intellectuals who want to completely have no internet,
Yeah.
and no cell phones, for a week, and just be, uh,
So did you find it sounds like one of the big things that that sort of drives your, I mean, you talked about this before, but one of the big inspirations for you is stuff that either sounds improvised or this idea of this world music. And
right.
does that, I'm sure that must have some connection to, I mean, really the influences you had when you were younger. I
Yeah.
mean, jazz is certainly takes
Right.
elements of that, especially this early jazz that was probably heavily influenced by like the show tunes and
Right.
popular music, but then
Yeah.
also this idea of complex harmony. So it sounds like that's where your ear gravitates toward. And so, can you talk a little bit about these? I don't remember what it was, but I've seen you play some like jazzy interpretations or some things that you've arranged yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, okay.
So one thing about my career, which I don't know if it's good or bad, but I have a couple of agents that I get. Well, this was pre-COVID period,
Right.
but a pretty steady supply of gigs.
Yeah.
Where you go and play background music for people, and I started doing that years, when I first got out of art school as an undergrad.
Hmm.
But whereas a lot of people stop doing that at one point, or they go on to another thing or whatever.
Sure.
For
Sure.
some reason, it's always been kind of part of my total. Even playing concert, even when I was playing concert, I always kind of did gigs, and I used the gigs as a chance to practice what I was playing in a concert.
Sure.
So I don't know. I suppose at one point I could have said I don't want to do these anymore, and there's certainly some downsides to them. But at the same time, I remember when my kids were really, really small. It was, and before I was full time, at the college, it was really, I really was appreciative of having that income.
Yeah.
You know. But anyway, so to make a long story short, I ended up developing on those gigs a way to play standard tune songs, pop songs, jazz things in a soloistic manner, but I never wrote anything down.
Hmm.
So I had repertoire coming off the great American songbook, Ellington and Porter and all
Yep.
that, and then I would take pop tunes of the day, Elton John, and all the way up to whatever's going on now,
Sure.
Sting, whatever, and I would make up arrangements of them on gigs, and people would recognize. So it was kind of necessity.
Right.
It wasn't really anything I ever felt proud of or anything. It's just
Right.
it was kind of part of the job. So every once in a while, when I do the classical stuff, like a concert, I'll take one of those ideas that I had been cultivating in that climate and maybe formalize it, or I might work on it a little bit outside of that if I know I want to play it as an encore or something. I used to
Sure.
do like medleys of Stevie Wonder tunes, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
and work out some arrangements that have bass lines going, and the rough product was already accomplished in the gig,
Right.
but I would take it out of that, and sometimes I'd actually even write them down. I'd go home, and if I knew I was going to be wanted to play them either in a concert or as an encore,
Sure.
I'd actually start writing them down. So I guess what I would say is that connection in the pop world was really through that continual
Yeah.
connection to the gig world, which I never really let go of.
I think that's awesome. I think the fact is that, for me, who has finished the master's at the conservatory a couple of years ago, and now trying to find a balance between what I do during the daytime, which isn't classical guitar, and trying to find out what it
Right.
is that I want to do. I'm starting to really appreciate the people who are not the top level performers. I mean, those guys are great and they have great things to say and great things to do, but there's the people that have the mixed bag of things that they do and they create. To me is just, it's wonderful. I mean, it's like, it's Andrew York, right? Who performs his own music,
Right.
right? He's a very popular version of like not the archetype of classical guitar, right?
Right.
Because he's not up there playing lute suites anymore, lute
Right.
suites and the Grand Overture and all of this cool stuff. He's playing his own brilliant music, which is
Right.
just as great.
Right.
So I think it's absolutely wonderful that you do that. So I'm looking at the time. We're going to wrap up shortly.
Okay.
I have a questionnaire that I'm going to ask you, but before I do that, I want to ask you this one question. You get to answer this in whatever format you'd like. You've seen sort of a really wonderful landscape, like a time lapse of classical guitar, right? You saw it not at its birth or its inception or its like genesis of coming to the United States and being born in our schools, but you saw it at a time that's certainly not today. And so I just kind of want to know what do you see has been like the course of classical guitar, the I don't want to say like, I don't want to distill it down to an ignorant question, like, is it better today than it was back then? But I kind of want to hear your thoughts about how the landscape has changed and where you would like to see it go forward.
Well, one thing I noticed, and I started, uh, you know, reflecting on what you just asked when I went back for the doctor when I was working on the DMA in around 2009, 2010, and I started to get reacquainted with the guitar world because I got very involved with academia
Sure.
and all those years, and I was worrying about how I was going to teach theory courses and ear training and what the best way to teach, Western survey and all of that. I kind of lost touch with the guitar world a little bit. It was great to kind of reconnect, but it was also a little scary. And the one thing I did notice, which I still continue to notice, is the amount of extraordinary players is just staggering now. And you can find them all on YouTube,
Yeah.
which is another. I can, I hate to say it, but I remember a time when there was no YouTube, and so if you wanted to see Segovia, I remember in 1973, with the binoculars, looking at Segovia's right hand when I first saw him perform. Christopher Parkening, same thing.
Sure.
And these artists didn't even have videos that they could sell. That was even later.
Wow.
So you would have to just be lucky enough to buy a ticket and get in that and get the best seat you could, and hope that you could learn something by watching. And so now you can watch these fantastic players, the best in the world, at 2 o'clock in the morning if you want to.
Yeah.
And I think that has really changed, because the level, I think, has really ascended to quite a different than it was when I was learning.
Mm.
You know, and younger and younger as well. I mean, you just have to go onto GSI's website.
Sure.
You see all these fantastic players that you never heard of, and they're
Yeah.
playing beautifully. They're trying out these guitars, and so it's really inspiring. And I think the pedagogy also has improved in the schools, in the colleges,
Yeah.
enabling this. That's the other part of it. So more access, better pedagogy,
Yeah.
and that's
Wonderful.
all been good for us. You know, that's all good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Very good. Well, it's been such a pleasure. I'm going to hit you with the questionnaire that I ask everyone.
Okay.
These are a little silly, but a little, well, you be you.
Okay.
Okay. Here's 5 questions. Question number
Okay.
1. What is the best gig you've ever had?
I have to ask, what do you mean by gig? I mean,
Yeah, right. So I leave that purposely vague. You can think of it as a concert, a performance, a master class, like the best moment. When I think of it, I think of the best moment on stage, but it could be anything.
well, I guess I would say I did play a voice and guitar recital at Weill Hall, New York, and just the whole way that worked with the beautiful dressing, with the beautiful sound. I'd never really played a concert with so much in such luxurious conditions, I guess I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
You know, with the whole thing was. So I was performing with a vocalist at the time, and we did a voice and guitar thing. Another one of the Boston contacts I made.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was, I guess, that was the most. I don't remember playing so well on that, but in terms of the gig itself, that was the
Yeah.
most fun to be in that environment. You know.
Do you remember what you guys played?
Yeah, we did some the Britain
Mm-hmm.
songs, and
Yeah.
we did the folk songs, the Schreiber songs,
Okay.
those. Um, yeah. So yeah, that was
Yeah.
the most interesting in that way.
And then the second question is the polar opposite. What is the worst gig you've ever had?
The worst gig.
Like one of the, give me a horror story.
Well, I'll have to go into the pop world for this one.
Sure.
One time I was playing a gig in I think it was in Old Lyme, Connecticut, and it was in this place where there was a dartboard right next to where we were performing. And they were shooting darts at this
Oh, Jesus.
dartboard while we were playing. So that was a little nerve wracking.
That's why you don't do that. Yeah, that's why you don't
Yeah,
play.
it was a little distracting, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah, sure. Question number 3, and this can pertain to music or life or however you see this is, what is the best piece of advice anyone's given you, and who gave it to you?
Best piece of advice. Well, I guess I would say a friend of mine once told me, I mean, it goes along with the general concept of be yourself,
Sure.
but which you could say in a lot of ways. But um, a friend of mine said you can only make a mistake if you're acting. If you're not
Mm,
acting and it's real, you can never make a mistake. So
that's awesome.
I always remembered that, that was a theme I had gotten from my lessons with Dick and David Leisner, was that,
Sure.
if what you say is real and you meant it, it doesn't really matter what happens up here. You can't really ever make a mistake. It's only when you're trying to be something you're not that you make mistakes or you're unsure.
That's
So
that's awesome. That's heavy. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
Wonderful. Um, question number 4.
Sure.
What never fails to inspire you?
I love to in any genre. I'll say I'll speak within musical contexts here. I love to see people doing what is real for them
Hmm.
and not trying to be something that they're not.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what that is. So if I hear, when I used to hear Frank Sinatra singing Beatles tunes, that used to always bother me because it just wasn't who he was. You
Right.
know, it was him doing it because some producer probably said you should do a cover of this tune.
Right.
But when he was singing with the Count Basie band, that was him.
Yeah.
And
That was
all
him.
this other stuff that you can't really even describe comes out when you're acting out of that place. So I get inspired whenever I see someone who's able to find that place and it's real. I just was watching a video of Stephanie Jones. Have you seen her? She's a
She
fantastic guitarist on
she has
YouTube.
the blonde
Yeah,
bangs, right?
the hair.
I
Yeah.
interviewed Rupert Boyd, who studied with her, I believe, because she's in Australia, I believe.
I don't know much about her, but she
Yeah.
exudes what I'm talking about. That's why
She plays like
someone who's
that 10
really,
string guitar or something. Yeah.
yeah, 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 beautiful player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's really cool, really cool.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it's funny because the who I was just talking about, Rupert Boyd, also studied with David Leisner in the early 2000s, and all the things that you were saying lined up with him. So that's really
Hmm.
cool. Okay, final question. Are you ready?
I'm
I
ready.
don't have any dramatic music to play. My guitars are over there, so I can't play any dramatic music. Question number 5. This should be a fun one. What is your favorite non-guitar activity to do?
I enjoy running. I'm a runner. I run almost every morning, even though my doctor says I shouldn't be. I love to get out there and I throw my shoes on. Sometimes I go out when it's still dark out, like in 4 or 5 in the morning. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Not now. It's light earlier, but I love the space. I love the time, the focus, and I just find that it puts me on track for the rest of the day.
Mm,
And and to balance that, I do some meditating as well, which helps to kind of inner outer
sure.
kind of thing going on.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
I would say running is really, but I'm not good at it by other people's standards. I'm not very fast, but I go at my own pace.
Sure.
So, yeah.
I started this couch to 5K plan,
Yeah,
which is like and I'm on the third. I'm actually really enjoying each, and it's very similar to classical guitar, right? It's like
I've
if
heard of that before. Other people I know have mentioned it to me.
and so it's this plan where in 8 weeks you go from being a fat couch person like me to being able to run a 5K. But what I'm doing is I'm taking my time with it, and I'm not being really strict with this now. Oh, it's the third week now, I gotta switch to that. I'm actually staying on the increments, and it's similar to practicing scales in a way, right? Like, let's say you're trying to play the licks from the Aranjuez at performance tempo, right? Well, you can't do that until the ones underneath it feel easy. And if the ones
Right.
underneath it don't feel easy, then you can't go up to that. So I'm really enjoying that. Like on this one thing I'm at right now, right? It's like run for 3 minutes and then rest for 90 seconds and run. And at first I was like, I can't do this. And I couldn't
Mhm.
really. And now I'm starting to feel easier. So once it feels really easy, then I'll go to the next level. So
Sounds good. I hope you continue it. Sounds
me
great.
too. Me too. I love to get rid of
It's
this.
also good with the nails. You don't have to worry about breaking nails
Yeah.
when you do it. So that's another
Yeah,
good thing
exactly.
about
Yeah,
running.
exactly.
We have to give up bowling and frisbee pretty early. We as
Bowling is
guitar players, frisbee.
bowling is fun.
Yeah, I
It can
guess.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I remember the first time I did that. It's like the thumbnail was the first
Yeah.
thing to go. Well,
Yeah. So
thank you so much for doing this, and I think people are going to really learn a lot.
thank you for having me, Ben, and I hope we stay in touch. I'd like to know the next time you're playing. Keep in touch with me,
Absolutely.
okay? All right.